The National Disability Insurance Scheme is rife with corrupt practices, according to its integrity chief. Good times for farmers, fishermen and foresters, and everyone's favourite meme stock, GameStop, surges 75% on a single post on Reddit. Welcome to Fear and Greed Daily Business News for people who make their own decisions. It is Wednesday, the 5th of June, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you have an interview coming up with Alan Kirkland from ASIC.
Sure do. We talk all about a campaign they are running to get people with financial hardship, people who are struggling to repay debts, to get in touch with their lenders, because lenders can do a lot for people. They can potentially suspend repayments for a couple of months. They can lower repayments. In fact, lenders have to work with customers on this stuff. What's amazing is just how many people don't want to approach their lender in times of hardship. They might be embarrassed. They don't even know that they can do it. And there's a campaign that ASIC's pushing. So it's well worth a chat. It's just interesting, the ins and outs of what you can do when you've borrowed money and how you can perhaps cushion some of the challenges you're facing when you're repaying debts.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. It's interesting as well to see ASIC. You kind of think of them, obviously, as a regulator just dealing with the organisations themselves, but this is a very consumer-focused campaign.
Definitely.
And Sean, the other big thing today to mention is the Fear and Greed newsletter. It is just hours away from landing in inboxes. So it is not too late, is it, to head along to fearandgreed.com.au, pop your email address in, and you too will receive the Fear and Greed newsletter, in which you will be teeing off on a number of the big business stories of the week. Can you give us any clues as to what will be coming up?
No. Well, look, I would say fear not. If it doesn't arrive in your inbox at 11:15 as per usual, fear not, because it may well be it's going to be 11:45, I can tell you that, because, of course, economic growth figures are out today. And so we'll send it immediately after that for my take on those economic growth figures. But that's one thing that we're talking about. Plenty of other things as well.
Yeah, it is going to be a good read. So make sure you sign up, fearandgreed.com.au. Sean, on with the show. The main story this morning, the National Disability Insurance Scheme Integrity Chief says 9 out of 10 plan managers show signs of fraud, and the legal system would be overwhelmed if all the scams carried out are prosecuted. This is huge.
Yeah. John Dardo told the Senate committee that internal analysis shows 90% of plan managers, those managing funding for up to 100 participants, portrayed significant indicators of fraud. He also said there are dozens of examples where organised crime groups are abusing the system, including encouraging the use of NDIS money to buy drugs and alcohol. More than 60% of the 650,000 NDIS participants use a plan manager, according to the latest quarterly report. In fact, the government has encouraged people to use these plan managers. There are more than 1,500 plan managers, with an average number of participants using plan managers surging. In fact, they're up almost 50% over the last couple of years, according to the Financial Review. Payments involving these plan managers totaled $5.7 billion in the 3 months to the end of March. 44% of payments went to unregistered plan managers who typically service people with plans of less than $100,000 per annum. Mr. Dardo, not surprisingly, says more needs to be done sooner given the corruption in the system. Now, the government has spoken about changing these plan managers, and just the fact that there is nowhere near enough control and transparency around what's going on. But the numbers here are just incredible.
Yeah, that is quite remarkable. It is an extraordinary story, Sean, with Mr. Dardo's evidence now prompting opposition claims that drugs are being trafficked to vulnerable people under the scheme.
When asked what kind of drugs are being bought, such as ice, heroin or cocaine, Mr. Dardo said, and I quote, "You name it, it's on the list," end quote. He said $2 billion is being spent incorrectly, and there are thousands of cases where participants are claiming things that are not consistent with their plan. Without going into the detail, people get a plan at the beginning of the process. And within that plan, there's a set amount of money which they will be funded. The whole idea with the NDIS is that they choose how they use that money. Obviously, some of those choices aren't going to health products. For example, recent examples included a $20,000 holiday, a $73,000 new car. Now, the opposition attacked the government in question time yesterday over the evidence. We're going to hear plenty about this. The minister responsible is Bill Shorten. He has come under fire also in the past couple of days after it was revealed in Senate estimates that he's paying a speechwriter $620,000 for 2 years of work, which is a pretty tidy sum to be earning. Anyway, the NDIS is going to be front and centre of the news debate for the next few days.
Oh, it certainly will be. Those numbers are all just quite staggering. Turning to local markets now, Sean, how did things go yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.3% to 7,737 points, reversing the trend of the previous two sessions. Energy stocks were the worst performers, while materials also went backwards. Best in the day for the second straight session were the financials. Iron ore prices have dropped on the back of fears about demand from China that pushed Fortescue Metals, BHP and Rio Tinto lower. Energy suppliers fell. Woodside, Santos, Beach Energy, New Hope, Whitehaven, those last two being the coal companies, they're all lower. However, gold prices rose and that helped the gold diggers, Perseus Mining, Northern Star, for example. In corporate news, family tracking app Life 360 rose 2% after the launch of an initial public offering in the United States. The group plans to raise about $150 million. Life 360's share price has more than doubled so far this year. Budget jewellery group Lavisa fell another 1.7%. After Monday's 10% fall. That came after Smiggle boss John Cheston was announced as Levisa's new CEO, and the former boss of Virgin Australia, John Borghetti, will become Crown Resort's new chair. Crown nowadays is owned by private equity giant Blackstone.
A fair bit happening locally. What about international markets?
Ooh, even more happening, Michael. Even more. US data showed a slowdown in factory activity in the world's biggest economy for the second straight month, adding to the argument that the Federal Reserve should cut rates later this year. That pushed the Aussie dollar higher to almost 67 US cents, and bond yields here and overseas fell. In the US, investors have priced in almost 25 basis point rate cuts this year. Over the past week in Australia, traders have wound back expectations of a rate rise and have fully priced in a rate cut sometime in the next 12 months. Oil prices have continued to ease, with Brent crude falling below $80 a barrel for the first time since February. Now, Michael, I slightly misled listeners yesterday. A bit of a mea culpa.
Oh, go on. Does this mean that you misled me as well?
Yeah, I apologise. So I mentioned that OPEC Plus had agreed to extend oil output cuts. So that takes supply out of the market. And I said, so don't expect oil prices to fall anytime soon. What I didn't realise, and this is a misleading part, is that OPEC Plus also agreed that voluntary cuts from 8 members could be gradually unwound from October. In actual fact, that might put more supply into the market, and that's why oil prices have come off a bit. So I only gave half the story, so I apologise for that.
So then what does it mean then for petrol? I'm just
prices?
Self-interest again, Sean. When do I fill up the mower?
Well, I'd probably do it now, should be known.
All right.
Prices are pretty good. Well, depends where you are in the country. Pretty good on the East Coast, not so on the West Coast.
Sean, can I share with you a fascinating piece of feedback that we received from a listener based in Perth?
Please do.
It was a note that I received via Fear and Greed's Facebook from Ivan, who listens in Perth. And when we're talking about petrol prices and about how we didn't really understand how the price cycles worked, about how it did seem to kind of be just quite variable, and there wasn't much sense to kind of the different prices that were being charged around different places in the country. Anyway, Ivan wrote to us then, and I thought this was fascinating. He says, for what it's worth, over here in sunny Perth, fuel prices are set at 6 a.m. and they do not change until 6 a.m. the next day.
Yes.
Tomorrow's prices are published around 3 p.m. each day. It's a lot more user-friendly and gives good transparency to the system. I think that is fascinating. I wasn't aware of that. And I think, go WA, this is something that should be everywhere.
Yeah, that way you can actually plan when you want to buy petrol and you'll know when it's expensive or not.
Yeah, so I just thought that was a ripper. So thank you, Ivan, for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
You've taught us both something today. Usually it's just Sean teaching me. Very rarely do I teach Sean, but today you've taught us both.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ivan.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there was a slew of economic data out yesterday from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which generally suggest that the March quarter economic growth figure, which is due out at 11:30 this morning, will be pretty low.
Real low. 0.2, 0.3% or so? Undoubtedly, the economy is struggling, or at least it was struggling the first 3 months of the year on the back of the cost of living crisis and higher interest rates. The figures yesterday show that company profits fell in the first quarter of 2024 and inventories rose. Now, the main reason for that is that consumers just aren't spending as much. You might think that higher inventories is bad for growth, but it's actually the other way around. It suggests companies are ordering more stuff, so that's actually a positive. Manufacturers have to make it. But Australia's current account balance fell into deficit last quarter. There's two parts to that. The trade surplus, we talk about that, but it was actually smaller. We're buying more stuff from overseas, stuff like medicines, clothing, and footwear. The income deficit, or something known as the income deficit, surged. Now, income deficit is mostly what we pay in financial payments that come in and out of the country. So in this instance, the deficit was the result of offshore investors taking money out of Australia, particularly in the LNG and property sectors. Anyway, overall, the current account balance fell into a big deficit. The forecast for the March quarter growth figure, which comes out this morning, as you mentioned, is for a very weak economy. We had the head of Treasury in the last couple of days basically saying the same thing. It's very possible that it'll be outside COVID, it'll be the lowest growth rate in about 20 years, post 2000. So wait and hear all about it this afternoon in our afternoon report, or of course tomorrow, or in the newsletter.
Afternoon report, and tomorrow morning we'll catch up with Gareth Aird from Commonwealth Bank as well to get his thoughts on it. Excellent. As well. So really, if you want to know anything about the economy, just stick around with Fear and Greed for the next 24 hours. You will be inundated with economic information. Now, Sean, ABC, let's talk about radio. I love talking about radio because it's kind of where I've worked for quite a large chunk of my life. ABC's radio performance has tumbled in Melbourne. It's improved in Sydney, while Ben Fordham on 2GB in the country's largest market has knocked off Kiss FM's Kyle and Jackie O.
The biggest thing that happened in radio land in recent years is Kyle and Jackie O's extension into Melbourne. The two are Sydney-based. Now, the latest radio ratings include only 3 weeks of their show, so it's probably too early to make a call on their success or otherwise. What is noticeable from these ratings is the tale of two cities for the ABC. In Melbourne, the ABC recorded its lowest ever audience share since the current survey began more than 10 years ago. In Sydney, ABC bounced to record high listenership for this year at least. ABC Adelaide and ABC Perth rank above Melbourne in terms of audience share, while Brisbane lags behind the other main metro markets. Overall, 9 owned 2GB in Sydney and 3AW in Melbourne recorded strong ratings growth in the survey. Strong performances by Ben Fordham and Ray Hadley in Sydney, and Ross Stevenson and Russell Hawcroft and Tom Elliott in Melbourne. Just as an aside, and I know this because you used to work for this gentleman, Michael, Ray Hadley, it was his 157th consecutive win in his time slot in the Sydney market. 3 more, and that is 20 years of being top in the morning time slot in Sydney. 20 years. Phenomenal.
It is a pretty spectacular record, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone can match. Neil Mitchell in Melbourne did very, very well for a long time, but I don't think he did that well.
No, I think Ray is setting a record that will take some beating. Now, Sean, production in Australia's agriculture, fisheries and forestry sectors remains on track to be the third highest on record next financial year, supported by improved growing conditions.
The total value of produce or output from the three sectors is expected to increase 2% in 2024-25 to just under $90 billion, according to the well-named Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences, ABARES for short. The key reasons are better livestock prices and better growing conditions for crops. Most exciting, Michael, Australia's horticulture sector is on a tear, and produce value is forecast to hit a record $17.4 billion, led by increases in fruit and nuts. Now, I'm going to digress a little because when you get these stories, it's kind of interesting getting some of the details out. So, India reduced tariffs on chickpeas in recent years. In response, Australia's planting area of chickpeas has jumped 79%. And it's expected to be a major crop next financial year. It just goes to show how adaptable Australian agricultural producers are. I think it's great. Lentil plantings have also surged, for example. Mind you, grains and oilseeds are forecast to shrink slightly. But don't you think that's kind of cool that they see an opportunity, in this case in India, with a reduction in tariffs? They just plant a bunch of chickpeas.
That is amazing. Creditors in collapsed electric goods retailer Godfrey's will receive none of the $45 million owed to them, and employees will get just under 3/4 of their entitlements.
Administrators PwC said 26 groups had expressed interest in buying Godfrey's. However, none of the eventual 6 offers were deemed suitable. Godfrey's collapsed in January this year, hurt by increased competition from larger bricks and mortar players like Harvey Norman, also the surge in online buying. Godfrey's range has somewhat been superseded, according to the administrators. For example, they didn't stock the very popular Dyson brand. That hurt them. The PwC report says Godfrey's had succumbed to fierce price competition, worsening consumer sentiment, rising costs, inadequate financing, and a flawed strategy of trying to buy out franchise operators. So, Michael, after 90 years, it's the end for Godfrey's.
Sean, speaking of 90 years, it seems quite a significant number, because yesterday, as well, it was announced that after 90 years, P&O Cruises would cease to exist as a standalone brand within the Carnival Cruise Line.
So as a brand, not as a vessel, as a brand.
Yeah, so basically the P&O Pacific Encounter and the Pacific Adventure ships will be rebranded. They'll go within the Carnival Cruise Line fleet, and the Pacific Explorer, which was once known, I believe, as the Dawn Princess, is going to be retired. So a lot kind of happening in that space, but it's 90 years. 90 years the P&O brand has been around for in Australia. So it is, again, kind of the end of an era, really.
Oh, it is. I remember sort of growing up, the I think it was called the Fair Star or something like that.
Fair Star, the fun ship?
Fair Star, the fun ship. I remember it was, I don't know, it was an advertising campaign. I'm sure it was a P&O ship. And everyone wanted to go on Fair Star, the fun ship.
Yeah. Yeah, that was absolutely. That was finished in 1997, I think it was.
Is that right? Yeah, I'm aging myself. But yeah. How did you know that? You didn't even Google it. I'm sitting here next to you and you just pulled that from somewhere.
I love the following things, Sean. I love ships, I love trains, and I love planes. So I'm pretty well covered. If you want to talk about any of those three, I'm okay.
Good.
But that's not what we're here to talk about now. We have a couple more stories to get through. A third poultry farm in Victoria has been found to have a bird flu outbreak, but it's not the same strain that has spread globally and raised fears of human transmission.
Hundreds of thousands of birds have already been destroyed after bird flu was found at 2 other farms in Victoria last month. The third farm, which they announced yesterday, is within a few kilometres of the first to report infection. Both have the same H7N3 strain of the virus, while the other farm, the second farm, had the H7N9 strain. All 3 farms are in quarantine.
Okay, turning to international news now, and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to win an historic third term in office after a partial vote count published yesterday showed his party and its partners on course to win re-election, albeit with a smaller majority than before.
Modi's party, the BJP, and its National Democratic Alliance allies were ahead in at least 293 of 543 seats in India's lower house, allowing it to secure a third 5-year term and form the next government. Early trends showed the opposition India Alliance, INDIA Alliance, led by the Indian National Congress, performing better than expected and winning 229 seats. Now, we talked about this yesterday. The exit polls, which we were talking about that were released over the weekend after the end of voting, had projected the ruling alliance to win many, many more seats. But this is a tighter election than forecast.
Israel's right-wing coalition clashed for a third consecutive day over a US-backed plan to end the war with Hamas, with the ultranationalist finance minister threatening to oust Benjamin Netanyahu, quote, with all strength and aggression if the prime minister accepted it.
Bezalel Smotrich, who heads one of the 2 extreme right groups in Netanyahu's 5-party coalition, said the proposal set out by President Joe Biden over the weekend was dangerous and not binding for the Israeli government. If, and I quote here, if, God forbid, the government decides to adopt this offer of surrender, we will not be part of it and will work to replace the failed leadership with a new one. He said, according to the Financial Times, it's the latest show of anger from Netanyahu's far-right allies about a possible deal. Came after the National Security Minister accused Netanyahu of hiding details of it from him. It's a very challenging political situation internally as well as externally for the Israeli government.
Yeah, it certainly is. Finally, Sean, shares in GameStop surged as much as 75% on Monday night, Tuesday morning Australian time, after a post on Reddit purported to show that Keith Gill, the meme stock investor, also known, of course, as Roaring Kitty, had built a position in the struggling video game retailer that was worth $260 million by the close of trading.
Yes, the sharp rise came after Gill's account posted a picture over the weekend that appeared to show he had taken a share stake and options position in GameStop, the retailer. Now, GameStop's share price leapt through much of the day, though it did close only up 21%. The day trader, Roaring Kitty or Keith Gill, or it was actually on Reddit, so his name on Reddit is Deep Something Value, and the something starts with F, so we'll let you use your imagination on that one. He was at the center of the meme stock mania in 2021 when his social media posts encouraged millions of others to pile into the stock and squeeze out hedge funds, betting on a share price decline. After a 3-year silence, Gill reappeared last month on social media site X, sending GameStop shares soaring again, though that rally quickly fizzled out. Then we think it was him on Reddit, and GameStop shares surged another 75%. It is quite crazy.
Yeah, and that story just keeps on going. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. Your guest today, Alan Kirkland, ASIC Commissioner.
All about their campaign to get people who are struggling to make loan repayments to reach out to their lenders. And it's very important people do that. About 50%, almost 50%, have struggled to make repayments. So you're certainly not on your own if you're struggling to make repayments, and your lender can help you.
Yeah, indeed. It is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, which is also where you can sign up for the newsletter, which will be arriving in the next couple of hours. And also today being Wednesday, there's a new episode of How Do They Afford That out today, our sister podcast, all about making your money work a bit harder for you. Today, we're answering a listener question about financial priorities, basically whether you should kind of try and pay down your mortgage first or get your super sorted or kind of build up your savings a little bit, or whether you should be getting investing, how you kind of weigh up these various things, and especially if there's limited money to go around, what you should be putting your money into first. And so it's a really interesting conversation. Put a link to that one in today's show notes, and you can find How Do They Afford That wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Wednesday, the 5th of June, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast, and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.